Welcome back to Inclusive Design 24 2022, brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters, Intopia and Fable, and our Gold supporters, Barrier Break, TPGI, and UX for the Win. You can follow us on Twitter at ID24Conf, and if you have any questions for the presenters, tweet them using the ID24 hashtag, or post them in the YouTube chat for our Q&A at the end of the session. I'm joined by my wonderful guest host, Mark Thiel. Over to you, Mark.
Hello. Welcome and good afternoon from sunny Germany. Well, our next speaker and guest on our virtual stage over here is Johan Hauptmann. He's from Amsterdam, beautiful city. If you haven't been there, you should go. And Johan is accessibility engineer at Q42. And today, Johan is telling us the indisputable truth about accessibility. Johan, your stage.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back. Always glad to be a part of Inclusive Design 24. Like Mark said, I'm going to tell you a thing or two about the undisputable truth about accessibility. Well, is there an undisputable truth about accessibility? Something that cannot be discussed, something inevitable, a fait accompli? I think there is, or better to say, there are. For example, this is an undisputable truth. 1.2 million in the Netherlands use at least one accessibility feature on their mobile phone. This was tested, I noticed, because we have about 6.5 million people that have an iOS device in the Netherlands. And during a research I did, I found out that at least 1.2 million of them use one accessibility feature at least. There are probably much more. This is data. It's all based on data. And this is the kind of arguments that we need to convince people about the importance of digital accessibility. There are, of course, other arguments that are not less true, but none of them has worked as well for me as this one, because it is based on data and it's almost impossible to argue with. And this is what we need to create indisputable truths. I know because I've been working on accessibility for over 15 years now. And as an accessibility engineer, I soon found out that I cannot do this on my own. To create something fully accessible, I need the team. On my own, I can only create an accessible-ish product. To create a full accessible product, I need a designer, the other developers, the tester, the writer, the content creator, the project lead, product owner, and especially the client, the one who can make the decisions. But I found out that they seem to be the toughest cookie to crack. So I guess I spent most of the past over 15 years talking about accessibility instead of engineering, because I had to try to convince people that they should invest in digital accessibility. But without the support from someone who makes the decisions, this can be really tough. So I've done my fair share of stealth accessibility, secretly fixing it. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. But this only brings you to a certain point where you get an accessible-ish product. Like I said, you cannot do it on your own. You need full support. But it seems like the higher you move up in an organization, the more difficult it is to get this topic, to talk about this topic. Sorry about it. So I needed to find out what is holding people back. People who are in the position to make the changes, what's holding them back from investing in accessibility. The company I work for, we've asked this question to the CEOs and the managers. And what do you think the main reason was? Well, you might say it is awareness, but the great part is that nobody seemed to be unaware of the fact that there are people who really are in need of us to create accessible products. The problem is that they know there are people, but they think accessibility, that this is the answer I got the most. They think accessibility is too complicated and therefore too expensive to invest in. It's not that they are not aware about the importance. This is the main reason I got back. And this goes closely together with this question. How many of my users actually have a disability? because they want proof. They want proof that it's worth investing in. And I know it's a difficult argument to have, because it's difficult to provide this proof, but also it's not an argument you want to get into. Like I said before, people know there are actually people around that need digital accessibility, but they want numbers, cold hard numbers. And I think, like others here, I have used the well-known numbers from the World Health Organization on many occasions. The numbers from the World Health Organization that stated that 15% of the population worldwide has some form of disability. I also have used more specific numbers for the Netherlands that state that 25% of the population have some form of disabilities. But these numbers are quite abstract. These numbers do not tell them how much of their users have a disability. And it's going to be very difficult to show that. And I also think we should stop talking about disabilities when we talk about accessibility, because we put too much focus on that part. We should shift the way we think and talk about accessibility. We should talk about user needs, because nobody's going to argue with you about people with disabilities. Nobody's going to tell you that I don't care about people with disabilities. Nobody wants to be the dick. So I think instead of disabilities, we should talk about user needs, because otherwise it's going to be an argument that you're never going to win. And as soon as we start talking about user needs, the whole discussion changes. It's not a discussion anymore, because neglecting your users' needs is bad for business. So people tend to listen to this argument. And right now we have proof to show that what it is that users really need. We have the proof to show that what they really need is accessible products. That's where these numbers come in. Indisputable proof. We need data for that. In the Netherlands, like I said before, at least 1.2 million Dutch people use one accessibility feature or more. And a third of them even use at least two, which is about 400,000 people. It's quite a lot. And well, what are these features? And what do these 1.2 million people need? First, I'm going to tell you what these features are and how we got to these numbers. After that, I will dive a little bit deeper in some of them and introduce you to some people that use them or even depend on them. And I will also tell you what you need to do to support these features in your apps. And to finish it all off, I will have a small surprise for you, or actually a big surprise, a gift. And I hope that this gift will help you all by creating accessible products. First, what are accessibility features? If you've never heard of accessibility features on your mobile phone, I advise you to go to the settings on your phone and look for the term accessibility. Open it and a whole new world will open up for you. Because what you will find here is all kinds of settings to accommodate your device to your specific needs. For example, if you cannot see your device, this is the place where you activate VoiceOver. If you are having trouble reading the tiny fonts, this is the place where you can make the fonts as big as you want. And if you have problems with your hearing, switch on captions or live subtitles on Android here. But there's so much more. There's a long list of features that are all there for you to accommodate your device to your specific needs. And the great thing about it is that you, as a developer, it's pretty easy to read out these settings in a totally GDPR-friendly way. So bear with me. About 3 years ago, a colleague of mine told me he wanted to create a small script for iOS to see what features people were using on their iPhone. And he asked me, is there anything you would like to know? And while he was thinking about Apple Pay and is a watch being paired, I was thinking about these specific features. Because if we could only find out how many users change the font size, use VoiceOver, switch on captions, that could tell us something about the need for accessibility. So we added a script to a few apps of our biggest clients. And we waited for a few weeks and then looked at the data. And this really surprised us. What we saw was better than we could have expected. At first, we were able to collect data for about 1 million people. And during the past 2 years, we were able to collect data for about 2.5 people, like I said, in a totally GDPR-friendly way. We are not collecting any personal information. The only question we ask is what setting is on and what setting is off. That's all we do. And we are still counting. And I guess you want to see numbers now because I'm building up suspense, as you might have imagined. Well, what we found out was that 44% of the iPhone users had at least one accessibility feature switched on. And 15% used at least two. And this is based on data we collected for the past 2 years. So it is quite indisputable. And this definitely changed the view that people had about accessibility, especially for our clients that were involved in this research. One of them told me before he saw the numbers that any number of 5% or higher was worth investing in. So the rest is history. When the numbers came in, we had some work to do. For Android, we just started collecting data a short while ago. So it's difficult to say something that's undisputable about it right now. So I'm going to show you some numbers, but they are still, well, they're going to change over the next few weeks. It looks very promising though. It looks right now that at least 25% of the users that have an Android phone in the Netherlands, also a few million, that will also be a few million, use at least one accessibility feature, and a little over 6% use at least two. But it's, like I said, this is going to change. We are adding more and more features, and Android seems a bit of a more struggle to find the right data. But I'm pretty sure that within maybe a month or two, we'll have some solid data that we can say something about. Okay, so what are the features that make up these numbers? Let's dive into them, and to give you an idea, I will show you 3 samples and 3 people that use them, and I will also tell you what you can do to meet the needs of these people. First, font size. On both iOS and Android, users can change their font size, and a lot of them actually do. 35% of these 2.5 million people changes the font size. 20% makes it even bigger. And if we translate this 20% to this 2.5 million, that's about 500,000 people that crank up the font size. And this is way more than the amount of people with a visual impairment in the Netherlands that we know of, because that's somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000. A possible explanation for this difference could be that people in the Netherlands are aging, and that more and more people need reading glasses, like Edith. Edith is a woman somewhere between 35 and 50. That still is a mystery to us, but she is a product owner at the famous Van Gogh Museum. And she works on both online and offline accessibility. And like a lot of women of her age, she needs her reading glasses. But also like a lot of women of her age, she prefers to leave them in her purse. That's why she changed the font size on her iPhone to a bigger format. But what really, really annoys her is that a lot of apps do not respect that. Her personal preferences seem to be ignored. And because these apps ignore her, she tends to ignore these apps. That makes sense. And I tell you, it's not difficult at all to meet her needs. Here are some examples of what you can do to respect her preferences programmatically. I will not dive into it too much, but here are some things that you need to know at least. On Android, use scale independent pixels. Because if you use this ensures that the user's preferences are taken into account. On iOS, support dynamic type. If you use this function, the font size will also change according to preference of the user. On React Native and on Flutter, text scales automatically. You can only break it by using the wrong properties. So please leave it as it is and be very careful when you're doing something with font sizes in any of these platforms. But of course, like I said before, you need a team. So I'm also looking at you designers. I know it is hard to believe that your design will look different on different devices of different people with different needs. But people want to change it to their specific needs. And you can still have a little control over that. And for that, you need to be flexible in your design. Cater for the extra room a font will take up, and check what happens when somebody changes the font. And think about the scenarios and how you will be able to convey important information. And as an example, I'd like to show you what happens in the weather app on iOS. I'm showing the screen right now. And you will see all these numbers, the degree centigrade, and all the little clouds. But I want you to pay specific attention to what happens in the 10-day forecast in the bottom half of the screen. This is what happens when I scale text. It changes, the layout changes, the little visual for precipitation was removed. And you might argue that, well, you're given less information, but also there were things added. Because the whole layout changes, an extra L is added for the lowest temperature, an extra H is added for the highest temperature. So somebody really thought this through. And although you might say there is room for improvement because there is a visual removed all of a sudden, still, it's great to see that somebody really thought this through. It does not get cluttered because that can happen if you scale your font. Let's move to another feature, dark mode. Well, to be honest, Apple does not consider dark mode to be an accessibility feature, but Google does. And I tend to agree with Google on this because there are people that cannot do without it, like Colinda. A few years ago, when Colinda was working as a CEO for a famous Dutch design brand, she decided to take a break and move to another job. So she took a short sabbatical. She went to South Africa with her wife and her kid, but during a safari trip, disaster struck. She had a brain hemorrhage. And since she was in the middle of a wildlife park, it took about 2 hours to get her to the hospital with a Land Rover. Well, given the circumstances, she came out of it really well. She lost a bit of her vision in one eye, but what's more important, she lost the ability to stay focused for a longer time. But she wanted to get back in the game again. She wanted to work again. She wanted to work, well, on the same level she worked before. But she soon realized that it would be very difficult to operate at this level. But she managed. And now she is helping startups and scale-ups by giving advice on how to run their business. But for that, she needs her phone and her laptop. And she's not able to look at a bright white screen for longer than 5 minutes, otherwise she will get tired and she can't do anything anymore. So without dark mode, she's not able to do her work. But there's one problem, and it is not a lot of apps respect that need. Therefore, she cannot use these apps. In our research, we found out that 30% of the iPhone users had dark mode turned on. And I estimate around now that about 20% of the Android users does that. And I'm pretty sure not all of them really need dark mode. Some switch it on because it's comfortable, some switch it on because it's beautiful. But there are people who are really need dark mode, people who are sensitive to light, like people with visual impairments, or people who have trouble focusing, like Colinda, or people with ADHD. They all need the calm look of dark mode because light mode requires a lot more from the brain. I have dark mode turned on constantly myself, especially at night when I'm reading on my phone. It's really good. As a developer, of course, you need to cater for 2 color palettes. But what is the best place to meet the needs of Colinda and all the others that need dark mode? As early as possible in your project. When you are laying the ground rules for the use of color, that's the place where you have to, say something about dark mode. Embed it in your style guide, so it becomes inevitable for everyone. As soon as, if you as a developer see that there is no color palette for dark modes, go ask for it because the earlier, the better. The last feature or features I like to talk about are speak screen and speak selection. For some people, text is the only way to take in important information in an app. Any information that's only conveyed by visuals is totally lost to them. For example, like users of a screen reader, like Jesse. Jesse works as an expert or a consultant on accessibility for Visio. And Visio is a Dutch expertise center on visual impairments. And for anybody who saw my talk last year at Inclusive Design, he might look familiar because he was part of the team that created SenseMath. SenseMath is an app that translates mathematical formula into sound. And we created it specifically for blind high school students. And since Jesse is an expert on innovations in the domain of impairments and also an expert voiceover user, he was part of this team. And without him, I'm pretty sure that SenseMath would never have been the great user experience it is now, because he pushed us to the limits. But he's also the worst person to test an app with, because he will always find his way. Even if something is not accessible, he will find a way to get to the information he needs. And what really, really annoys him is that most apps lack labels. Because without proper labeling, an app becomes unusable for people that depend on a screen reader. What is proper labeling? The weather app again. When you look at the screen, you see all these numbers, but you also see a lot of icons. All these small clouds, suns, showers, they convey some really, really important information. They convey the information that, well, so you will know what today is going to look like, tomorrow is going to look like, or next week's going to look like. If you cannot see these icons, you need some other way of information. There needs to be a textual equivalent, also known as a label. I think I might say that this is the easiest one to fix, but it's also the most forgotten thing in apps. While so many people benefit from it, it only takes one line of code, and still most of the time it's forgotten. One line of code in both iOS and in Android, both of them. And again, team up with a UX designer or a copywriter to create labels that describe best what information of an image, button, or icon should be in there. What is the most important information it's conveying? I guess you missed the numbers for this one. Well, here they are. I hoped so much that our research would show a huge amount of screen reader users. Unfortunately, it did not. Only 2 promille, 0.02% uses VoiceOver. And the number of TalkBack users seems even lower. Why this is? Do people tend to skip apps because they are not usable with VoiceOver? I don't know. That's a whole different kind of research that I hope I can do somewhere later this year. But for now, well, we should ask ourselves, is this a reason to no longer focus on screen reader users? Of course not. If your app works with a screen reader, it will work in many other scenarios for digital accessibility as well. So it's the best testing tool there is when you're working on digital accessibility. But also there are people who need it. But like I said before, this is a different argument. Not always, well, not everybody wants to listen to this. So we need data again. Well, luckily for us, there are higher numbers of people that use features that need the same thing as a lot of screen reader users do: proper labeling. A screen reader user needs more, but this is one that's important and is also, well, there's also another group that needs this, and that are people who use Speak Screen or Speak Selection, especially the users who use Speak Screen. Well, what are those two features? When Speak Selection is switched on and the user selects a piece of text, the option will appear to have it read it out loud. When Speak Screen is switched on, you have the possibility to have the whole screen read out to you by making a specific gesture. And this feature is, particularly, particularly useful to people who have trouble reading, trouble seeing the screen, or trouble hearing. And this feature is particularly useful to people who have trouble reading, trouble seeing the screen, or trouble hearing the screen. or trouble with focusing again. But try to use this function on a screen that does not have proper labels and it doesn't make any sense. This was the last example I'd like to share with you. Because of time, this is what I can share with you now. And there are a lot of more numbers. And well, wouldn't it be great if there was a place where you could find all this information? Anything you need to create awareness and to find out how to support all these features, how to make your app accessible. A place where there would be data on the real use of accessibility features, a place with code references for all the major platforms, iOS, Android, Flutter, React Native, Xamarin, or a place where you, as a newbie, would find out where to begin, or as a seasoned expert in accessibility, would find all kinds of tips on how to fix it. Where you could find information about the guidelines, but this time optimized for apps and not for web, with all the proper code examples. And where you could find out how to gather your own data. Well, this is exactly what I'm working on right now. And we've waited until Inclusive Design to spread the word that today, as of today, you can visit this platform. It's called beta.app.org. The official name is app.org, but we're opening the beta right now. And we like to call it the one-stop shop for app accessibility. And it's still under construction. And we are working really, really hard to release this before the end of this year. But there's already so much information that I can share with you. And it's all there and free for you to use. And we're building this together with the App Foundation, Q42, of course, and heavily funded by the SRDN Fund. And that's why it's all free. Because we all need this. It's a gift to the internet, but it's also, because we think it's an absolute necessity because there was no single sort of tool about app accessibility. You had to look everywhere. We're trying to put all this information together. It is not finished yet. So please, when you visit it, be a little bit forgiving, but do share your feedback. Let me know what you think and especially what you need so we can improve on it. Let's build this thing together. And since we are still in the middle of gathering data, especially on Android, these numbers will change. You'll see here. This number will change over the next few months. And of course, the numbers right now are especially based on what's happening in the Netherlands. We are hoping to add more international clients later on, international parties that will give us our data. So if you think of anything, well, please share it with me. And if you want to help out, you're more than welcome. Reach out because we need, well, more content and data. This was all built because we need to fix accessibility together. This quote from Darice, who happens to be deaf, says it all. It's not Darice who has the disability, it's us who are disabling her. We are responsible for shutting people out if we do not do our utmost best to make our apps accessible. But we need to do it together. We need each other. We need the designers, the developers, and especially the people that make the decisions on this, so they can convince everybody else that this is important. We also have to show them that it's not hard at all, and that's why this platform is here. So use it, and let's enable people like Darice to do whatever it is she needs to do, and to meet her needs. I thank you very much for listening to my story. This is what I had to say, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now or reach out to me later in any of these ways. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johan. That was a great presentation, and that looks like an amazing resource there. Do we have any questions or any discussion, Mark?
Right now in the chat and on Twitter, there's no question left at the moment. That means you gave a brilliant talk explaining everything really clearly. From my end, I have to say, thanks a lot for this massive reminder. As I said earlier in another talk, it needs people like you to remind us constantly that we are in our bubble and we need to break out and need to get antennas for what's happening around us. As an example, I can only say that once I started having live captioning at my event, I thought like, well, I don't have any deaf people at my event so far, so who's it helping? But I got so much good feedback from all the other people as well, right? May it be people wearing glasses sitting far in the back, who weren't like super good in English, and they just said like, we can read along. So it's not just for people with disabilities, it's also for everybody else, right? So you improve everybody's life with that. Doesn't mean like it's only people who are deaf, blind, no hands, no legs, whatever. It's actually for everybody. And I see there's like something going on in the chat. Is there any question? Doesn't matter. No, it's not. So I guess if there are pop-up questions more than now, people are able to reach out to you, right? There's your email address, there's your Twitter, your LinkedIn, and please share the resource, help Johan making this tool, this website, this collection better. Share your feedback. And with that, I hand over to Ian to close the session. Thank you, everybody, for listening, for watching, and for joining us today.
Thank you, Johan, and thank you, Mark, for being such a great host over the last 3 hours, I believe. If you liked this session, hit the YouTube like button, and don't forget you can subscribe to youtube.com/inclusive design to be kept in the loop on any of our future events. Reminder that ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. With that, it just leaves me to thank our supporters, Intopia, Fable, Barrier Break, TPGI, UX for the Win, Equal Entry, Infoaxia, Intuit, the Law Office of Laney Feingold, Adrian Roselli LLC, and WebAble. We will be back on the hour with our next session, where Kate Avery will be talking to us about dangerous design, why we need to think about design ethics. Hope to see you then.